please take a moment to listen to the following safety message. There is no planned fire drill taking place today, and in the unlikely event of an evacuation, we ask that you make your way to the ground floor by the nearest available exit.
Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Fantastic. Well, this is amazing. Absolutely wonderful, this. It's been a really tiring week, but I feel really energised being here today. My first London International Shipping Week was 2 years ago, and the energy at that was great. Everybody was getting back after the pandemic, and but it was full of energy, and everybody was really enthusiastic. But the thing that really struck me at that was everybody knew where we wanted to be in cleaning up maritime, and but what we didn't have then was any sort of focus during that week, particularly on for us all to get together and focus. So today is the very first Clean Maritime Day at London International Shipping Week. So it's fantastic that you're all here. We can spend the day focused on the challenges that we face. So good morning. My name's Eamon Byrne. Some of you know me. I am the Deputy Director at DFT Maritime. I head up UK Shore and also work on decarbonisation policy and regulation in the department. We have an absolutely packed agenda today with loads of interesting things coming up, all about clean maritime. There is a QR code dotted around the venue. Looks like this up here. If you scan that, that does bring up the agenda, and you can pick and choose what you would like to go and see. There is also lots of our projects that we have funded throughout the past couple of years, Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition, which you can also go and talk to and see at first hand some of the things that we've been doing the past couple of years. We also have a panel discussion on the Clean Maritime Plan, the latest on green corridors, and a session on the Clean Maritime Research Hub. And then we also have later on an update from the UK Shore programme as a whole. Then following that, we do break for lunch. You do get the chance to refresh yourselves. And then we have the start of our Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition Showcase event, which is the time that you can all go and talk to those projects. And then lastly on the agenda today, we have an Ask the Expert session. There's also an Operation Zero event back up here in this very room later on this afternoon as well, for those that are particularly interested in the offshore wind sector and the vessels that serve that. So there's an absolutely huge amount happening. I'm really excited to be here. I was a little tired after the last few days, but then seeing you all has given me that buzz and that energy. So, but to kick the day off, we had to have an important speaker. And we certainly do. We've pulled all the stops out. So I would like to bring to the stage the Secretary of State for Transport, the Right Honourable Mark Harper.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Clean Maritime Day. And as Transport Secretary, I'm rightly challenged on how we're decarbonising our transport system now that transport accounts for the largest share of carbon emissions since we've made such progress in decarbonising our electricity generation system. And so transport is now the UK's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. I'm often asked about zero-emission road vehicles, electrifying our train network, decarbonising aviation and promoting active travel. But maritime often actually sails under the radar, avoiding the scrutiny that other modes face, which is why today is very important, because maritime can no longer be out of sight and therefore out of mind in the race to net zero. Because for maritime to stride towards future growth, it must do so with an ever-shrinking carbon footprint. UK domestic shipping emits more greenhouse gases than buses, coaches and rail combined. And in fact, just talking earlier this morning to some of the projects that won the bids in the Clean Maritime Demonstration competition that you'll be able to see this afternoon, talking to the Port of Dover, for example, about how significant carbon emissions are just on that crossing from across the short straits. It's clear we need to move significantly to decarbonise our maritime system. Our global shipping emission levels are on a par with Germany's entire greenhouse gas output. And despite progress in recent years, shipping fuel remains among transport's least clean sources of power. And as the backbone for international trade, it's in all our interests to see maritime thrive. But without significant intervention, the IMO predicts CO2 emissions from international shipping could grow by over 50% as we head towards 2050. And that's not inevitable and clearly not sustainable. Through greener shipping, we can help arrest the rise in global temperatures and will secure the future of our vital maritime industry. And just looking around the venue, you can see the tremendous work underway. Businesses, fantastic UK businesses at that, backed by this government's ambitious policy agenda, are at the forefront of the green shipping transition. So let me start with the policy arena first. The government's been clear that we want zero-emission shipping by 2050, which means significant fleet-wide emissions reductions as early as the 2030s, and that needs innovation at home and leadership abroad. It's why in July, the UK helped reach a global agreement at the IMO on a net zero shipping target by or around 2050. That was both an ambitious target, but also one where we reached the agreement of all 175 IMO members, which I think was a very significant achievement and not at all inevitable when we were conducting those negotiations. At COP26, we launched the Clydebank Declaration for Green Shipping Corridors, now with 24 countries on board. And that was one of the projects that I was talking about this morning, which is looking at the route between Dover, Calais, Dover and Dunkirk. And today we take a step further. That historic declaration, which was signed in Glasgow, will now be backed by an international green corridor fund, £1.5 million delivered in collaboration with the Netherlands, Norway and Denmark to set up feasibility studies to make those green corridor routes a reality. But government policy only gets us so far. Many countries, including the UK, are already testing new ways to power vessels. But that innovation must now give way to commercialisation, which means getting technology out of the lab and onto the seas. Technologies such as hydrogen, ammonia and battery power must become the norm if we're going to hit our targets. So that's why we've invested over £200 million under our UK Shore programme to accelerate towards that zero-emission future. Schemes such as the Clean Maritime Demonstration competition have already funded over 100 projects, and it was encouraging this morning to talk to those who've bid into multiple rounds of that competition to get their projects from the drawing board to a feasibility stage. And today I can confirm that a consortium of 3 universities, led by Durham, and alongside international partners, will run the UK's first flagship clean maritime research hub. Now, you'll have heard about the excellent winners of the Zero Emission Vessels and Infrastructure competition. 10 projects will receive a share of £80 million in match funding, so leveraging private funding as well, helping those cutting-edge technologies make that final commercial leap. We'll soon see electric ferries in the Orkney Islands, shore power across UK ports from Falmouth to Aberdeen, and methanol-capable engines powering offshore service vessels. So the transition to green shipping is underway, and it's underpinned by UK jobs, created by UK businesses, and supported by the UK government investment. Let me just finish by acknowledging the irony of Clean Maritime. And for those of you who were at the government reception at Mansion House, you'll know this is the bit of my remarks that Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal managed to steal from me, which, as I said at the evening, she's very entitled to do. And she made this point: up until 200 years ago, maritime, of course, was already zero emission. The age of sail, spanning thousands of years, was in fact the industry's first green age. So the challenge facing us today is effectively to go full circle, but with modern technology, which is harnessing that modern technology, the innovation of the fantastic businesses that you can see examples of today, and government policy to usher in that second green age, as green as the first one, but using modern technology and to meet the challenges of today's maritime industry. That's a huge challenge, but it's a one which the UK, along with our like-minded global partners, is ready to meet, and what this day of discussion in this forum is all about. So thank you all very much indeed for all of your efforts, for the teams that are developing this technology, and thank you very much for your support, and I hope you'll have a fantastic day, as Eamon said, looking at some of the fantastic opportunities in the years to come. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Secretary of State. I'm sure everybody here would agree that it's fantastic to hear about the outcome of the Clean Maritime Research Hub competition and the announcement of the International Green Corridor Fund. Something that you talked about at the IMO fireside chat yesterday, Secretary of State, was partnerships. And I think one thing that we've found throughout the whole of the UK Shore programme, and something that we're trying to do on the International Green Corridor Fund and the Research Hub, it's all about partnerships. I think you're dead right there. I think it's all about collaboration, and those partnerships between government and industry, and within industry and academia, is really crucial to delivering on what we're trying to achieve here. So thank you very much, Secretary of State. So we're going to get to hear more about some of those things later on, including a presentation from the Hub winner and a panel discussion on green corridors later on this morning. So thank you very much again for your time. I know you have a very busy schedule. You are more than welcome to stick around and hear as much as you want. But we're going to move now on to our next event, which is a Clean Maritime Plan panel session. So if you'd like to make your way to the stage, I'm going to ask Professor Sarah Sharples, the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department for Transport, to join us. Catherine Palmer, who's the shipping lead for the UN Climate Champions. Rear Admiral Paul Carroll, the Director for Innovation and Future Capability within the MOD. And Francesco Sandrelli, the Director of Environment for the UK Chamber of Shipping. Thank you, guys. Okay, so I'm going to give a very brief introduction, and then we've got some questions which I'm going to pose to the panel. And then hopefully later on at the end, if there's any time for questions from the floor. So please do start thinking about those, and we'll try and make some time. And think of your hardest questions. All the panel said to me earlier on that what they really relish is the really tricky, difficult questions. So please make sure that you think up those. Okay, so a little bit of background. Back in 2019, we published the Clean Maritime Plan. And that set out the route to net zero and identified the key ambition for the maritime sector. I think what struck me a couple of years ago at London International Shipping Week 2021 was that everybody had bought into that vision. But there was a resounding call, I guess, from that London International Shipping Week that what we really needed was a plan of how do we achieve that ambition and how do we get there. So since that Clean Maritime Plan in 2019, the department did publish the Transport Decarbonisation Plan, which set out some steps that we've taken. We've run some consultations on the course to zero, and we did some work on shore power, and you will have hopefully all clocked that we will now be including domestic maritime in the UK ETS. So, but one thing that we really wanted to do is update the Clean Maritime Plan, and our aim is to publish that by the end of this year, which will set out a pathway out to that 2050, and with some interim goals. And then underpinning that will be the policy measures and the regulatory measures that we would like to see in order to support the industry in achieving that trajectory out to 2050. So it's an ambitious pathway. I think it has to be. But I think we're all on board in trying to get there. So with that as background, we have about 50 minutes. I'm going to ask each of the panel in turn. I think on your first answer, if you want to introduce yourselves and say a little bit about yourselves and what you're interested in, then please do. But my first question, and I think, Sarah, if I may, I might start with you, if that's okay. What do you think, or what do you see as the key challenges and opportunities for the maritime sector when it comes to decarbonising?
Thank you. So, really great to be here today. My name is Sarah Sharples. I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor for the Department for Transport. So in that role, my job is to make sure that the department has access to the highest quality science and engineering, evidence and innovation in order to inform its policy, advice and decisions. So I'm a Professor of Human Factors by trade. I also live in Nottingham, which is almost as far as you can live from the sea in the UK. So I will be honest that when I joined the department 2 years ago, one of the things I was really excited to learn about was the work and the ambition within the maritime sector and the challenge that we all know we need to face in terms of decarbonisation. So the question I was asked was around the challenges and the opportunities. I work across the transport sector and look at the different ways in which we might decarbonise in different parts of the transport sector. We know that for automotive, we've got a strong pathway towards electrification with potential for hydrogen fuel cells for the larger vehicles. We know that in aviation, we're seeing the development of technologies to be able to use sustainable aviation fuel, but also consideration of the way in which we might need to change fuselage and aircraft design in order to accommodate hydrogen. We've seen the electrification of the railways and a clear path towards increasing the presence of electrification. It's much more tricky in maritime. It's less clear from a scientific point of view what the clear and most both cost-effective and practical opportunities might be. But it's also a really different sector in terms of the diffuse nature of the industry participants and by nature its international characteristics as well. So I think the challenges are that genuinely from a science and engineering point of view it is not clear what the right solutions will be, and that's why I'm so excited that we have the Clean Maritime Hub that we're going to talk about a little bit later on being supported because we need that science and engineering knowledge. But there's also an opportunity. So whenever as a scientist you see a graph with big lines of uncertainty, you don't get despondent, you get excited because that tells you there is research and discovery out there to be had. And we live in a country which is absolutely outstanding at research and discovery. So what we need to do is make sure that we are focusing the research and the discovery that's happening within industry and within our universities to be able to address the challenges that industry can articulate for us. But we don't need to be naive about this. The other big challenge I think that we face within maritime is the margins are low. So it's a quite different sector to say the aerospace sector with a couple of really big players who have an opportunity to economically invest in new technologies. We need to help industry work together to understand and navigate through the right outcomes. So I think in terms of challenge, it's difficult. In terms of opportunity, difficult things mean opportunity for discovery, and we're really well placed to deliver that discovery.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. I completely agree with all of that. You mentioned actually that the sector's international, which I think is a lovely segue. I think if Catherine, what are your views on the challenges and the opportunities there for the sector?
Yeah, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all this morning. So my name's Catherine Palmer. I'm the shipping lead for the UN High-Level Climate Champions for COP27 and COP28. So our work in the Climate Champions team is very much bringing the climate action that is happening in the non-state actor community to the work of the parties of the Paris Agreement. And so what we do is really mobilize and accelerate action and raise the ambition in the non-state actor world. So that could be corporates, financiers, investors, civil society, so anyone who is outside the member state government community. And we can really show what is possible, and by showing what is possible and what makes good business sense and what can be done, we can hope to be able to raise the level of ambition in the policy framework as well. And so we call that the kind of ambition loop that we work on. So we work on this model of being able to bring forward action that is being taken. I think in terms of the opportunity for the maritime sector, as we've said, international sector, there is a wealth of opportunity, and not only from the technology transition perspective, I think has been mentioned, there is no one clear technology pathway for shipping, given its diversity in terms of business models, trade and operation, types of ships. But I think having more technology choice allows for more opportunity to be available to the sector. And then I think as well, when you couple the technology opportunities with that of economic growth for national circumstances, but also the creation of highly skilled, good quality jobs across the maritime value chain. And I think also maritime as a sector is so interconnected in the whole climate action community. We have that connection and the opportunities that we have to be a good ocean steward and protect the ocean health and productivity, which is essential in the climate space, but also the role that shipping has with the energy side as well. We are a good first mover, high quality demand market, and can really, by decarbonising the maritime sector, we can stimulate investment into clean energy production as well. And so I think when you look at shipping as an interconnected sector, and the opportunity just seems to be expanding across all areas of climate action.
I couldn't agree more, actually, and I think that's probably a good time to bring Francesco in, I think. And from an industry point of view, Catherine there mentioned some of the opportunities around jobs and growth and as a sector, the integration with other sectors. So I'd welcome your thoughts.
Thank you. I'm Francesco Sandrelli. I'm the Policy Director for the Environment for the UK Chamber of Shipping. I worked for different shipping organizations in the UK, and I worked with the ship owner. First of all, Emond, I wanted to talk about a bit of the biggest opportunity that we have here, okay? The transition is happening. Shipping is not more business as usual. We build a ship for 25 years, and if we look now how is shipping respect 5 years ago, there are in order dual fuel vessel for the tonnage of the total tonnage of international ship. There are almost 50% of the total tonnage is dual fuel vessel. So the owner are building dual fuel LNG. They are pointing on methanol. Methanol is increasing, and they will build dual fuel ships for ammonia and hydrogen. The notation is there. The owner are doing energy efficiency measure in a big way. They are cleaning a propeller, they are cleaning hull, they are doing small modification. We have improved a lot in the last few years. So shipping is very, very ahead in what it's doing. And this is quite important because, like the Clean Maritime Plan said in 2019, the first mover of this transition, they will get the bigger benefit, okay? And the bigger benefit the government was telling is around 6.890 million per year. And the things that we need to take present, this is a big energy transition. So the first mover, they will change the trade. If the UK doesn't build, and here I'm going to the challenge, doesn't build the fuel infrastructure that are required doesn't point on shore power, we will have a movement of trade. Vessels, they will not come in the UK to bunker. We need to act fast because the business, shipping, is acting very fast, is planning ahead for 25, 35 years, okay? If there are not these infrastructure that are the anchor of the decarbonization, we cannot do nothing. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That you talked there about a first mover will get the biggest benefit, and I think that really resonates with me, particularly when we consider all the people we've got in the room and all the research that's going on. But perhaps if I bring in Rear Admiral Paul, I'd welcome your view, because you sit in a slightly different place to us, and we work really closely with MOD colleagues, and in particular the National Shipbuilding Office. But I'd welcome your thoughts on the challenges and the opportunities from a slightly different position, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you. You're absolutely right, Eamon. I do have a slight degree of imposter syndrome sitting on the panel today, and despite all the garb. And the reality is my background is as a ship's engineer. I spent most of my life in overalls, in everything from minesweepers to aircraft carriers travelling all over the globe. And as a consequence of that, I am by definition an enormous sinner when it comes to carbon emissions. The engines in the aircraft carrier I was the chief engineer for used, I think, we were about 35 yards to the gallon. So at the end of my career, I'm absolutely dedicated to a degree of redemption for which I need. I think the real reason I'm absolutely delighted to be on the panel today is that, and Eamon's right, the Royal Navy actually, from a UK perspective, is the largest customer for shipbuilding in the UK. We have, and I have responsibility for the running of multiple programmes for ships being built in Glasgow, in Rosyth near Edinburgh, North Devon, Belfast, Spain, France, and a number of different locations on your behalf, all creating important projects for the safety not only of this nation, but of course our allies and partners around the world. That ranges from a whole host of projects that really do take my portfolio from space right down to the bottom of the ocean to protect our national infrastructure. The key thing also from a Royal Navy perspective is that we also operate ports, some of the largest and most significant in the UK, the Clyde, Plymouth and Portsmouth. And also, from my perspective, it's the ability to be able to operate a force where we protect you and trade and our maritime sea lines of communication around the globe. We have everybody, people in the Royal Navy are operating from the Antarctic to the Arctic. And so we, for us, it's really important here because the work that's being done in this particular sector is absolutely critical to our operational effectiveness. Yesterday, we unveiled the design for our new fleet solid support ships. And from the very outset, we have focused on two things. The first of all, given the Cabinet Office guidelines, a commitment to social value. So, and we've put green technology absolutely heart of our requirement for that ship. And I can absolutely tell you that from a Royal Navy perspective, the energy chain to allow us to operate is absolutely fundamental to our success. So we have to be able to spread bet for the future. The other thing is, of course, to be able to operate around the globe, you have to be able to operate against multiple different regulatory regimes. And of course, Francesca is absolutely right. We're building ships that could operate for 50 years. So we have got to, from the very beginning, anticipate a number of degrees of change, and not just for our energy supply lines, but right back to our base in the UK. And indeed, as an overall decarbonisation, most of our benefit comes out of is actually in our real estate as a starting position. So how we build right back to how we build the ships, how we operate the ships, the infrastructure we put in place, and then the choice we have as those ships develop and the pathways through life. My final point is, therefore, most of my time is dedicated to the people. And I think this is, we can focus a lot on technology, but actually we do need to create the teams that are able to have the confidence to plan and program the money, to demand the change. And I think critically, the sailors, marines and the Royal Navy and the civil servants that support us and the industry supports us expects us to take a lead. And it's really right up there in the things that we care about a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was an awful lot in there that I'd love to cover, but your last point there, I think the people really jumped out at me. Well, apart from the 35 yards per gallon, but on the people front, I couldn't agree more. There's the NSO Skills Task Force recently. If anybody's not seen it yet, there was a report published by that task force. And I know that Rex at the NSO and his colleagues will be responding to that. But I encourage anybody out there to have a read of that, definitely. Okay, so let's move on. Several of you mentioned, or a few of you mentioned, sorry, regulation and policy. And so my second question is around what do you see as the role of government strategies, including the CMP and others, in having an impact on domestic decarbonisation? And let's start with you, Francesca.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, first of all, the industry has welcomed the original Clean Maritime Plan. It was very welcome, and the UK Chamber of Shipping has also indicated that the Clean Maritime Plan was very important. It was very important because it gave a sign of change. It gave a first step for the Department of Transport to tell us how we would have realized that Maritime 2050 transition. It was very good at that time, but now we are in the moment in which the industry is moving, and we are in the moment that that plan became clear, coherent, and like you were telling him on longer term, we need to be very clear what we are doing in the short term, mid-term, longer term. We discussed the longer time the target at the IMO. Now is the moment that we move from thinking to the target to action. And the action, they tell us how we will move. Now, one thing that I'm thinking that is important is considering the Clean Maritime Plan can tell very quickly to some of the energy producers that they need to produce more different fuel, they need to provide more different electricity import. For example, one simple thing that we can do is cutting the taxation on alternative fuel and electricity in the port in the UK. A lot of other countries, they don't have this. This will be a good signal and doesn't require any funding on infrastructure, okay? Another thing that we can do it is really thinking on how we want to build this fuel hub and this port. We need all this in a clear energy strategy. I've seen some of the past energy strategy, and they don't mention shipping, or when they mention shipping, they mention only hydrogen. We need really to think in a more creative way. There are vessels with different operations that need different things. Finally, I'm a fan of UK Shore. It's really provide a lot with his work. We need the clarity after 2025 was happened to UK Shore, and we need more investment. The investment of shipping are a lot. The investment that has been given to UK Shore are very, very minimal. UK Shore need to be helped more to help vessels. And if we are thinking a small amendment on UK Shore just to make it possible to move faster this transition, quick wins. We need to have some funding for something simple that it can reduce emission now, okay? Something not that is mega technological, but something that help to reduce now. And another things in the short term, Sarah was talking about the aviation fuel. Yeah, there is a sustainable aviation fuel. That is a very good specific signal for the aviation. Also vessels, they need biofuel. One way in which we can cut emission now is having a blend of biofuel import. They don't require change on infrastructure, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. There's an awful lot there. Sarah, you look like you're chomping at the bit to come in.
I think it's helpful just to sort of follow on from Francesca's very, very helpful sort of outline. So there's a couple of things that just sort of occur to me. I really agree on the quick wins and would use the analogy of the sort of marginal gains. We know that in maritime there are lots of things that can be done that can reduce fuel consumption now, regardless of the fuel. And so within the Department for Transport, we already have our Transport Research Innovation grants, which are very small pieces of funding, but have been shown to be a really good model of pulling technology along the technology readiness levels very, very quickly, thinking about how that might apply at that point of sort of almost completion to deployment would be a really interesting challenge, and I think we can take that away. But I also wanted to follow up on your point about sustainable fuels. It's really interesting that if any of you saw the US decarbonisation blueprint that was published in January of this year, they don't talk about sustainable aviation fuels, they talk about sustainable liquid fuels, and are much more neutral about the sector which will be the dominant user of sustainable fuels. However, there's a couple of things we need to remember about biofuels and future production of sustainable fuels. The first is that they're absolutely dependent on a feedstock. And those feedstocks are in demand by a range of different industries. And there's some analysis that we've been doing recently that's pretty terrifying when you look at the amount of feedstock that could potentially be available in the whole world and the number of demands that might be placed on the feedstock in the whole world. And that's taking a utopian vision that everyone gets equal access to feedstock and we don't have to move energy between different locations and various things like this. A little bit of spoiler from that work is it would really help if we all go vegetarian, but there are societal challenges around that as well, because the farming industry is an extremely valuable industry to many economies. So I think thinking about how we can use policy not only to stimulate the right technology investment and get the technology reducing fuel consumption in the very, very short term, we need to be extremely mindful of the consequences of policy for different sectors and for different modes within the transport sector. What we don't want to do is unintentionally create unhelpful competition. Sometimes competition can be really helpful, but if we end up with unhelpful competition between different sectors or between different transport modes, then we won't end up with a whole transport system. And we'll end up with part of a single journey being decarbonised, but blockers and pinch points. And you mentioned the sort of shore power as a challenge to that. So I think that making sure that within the department we work across the modes to consider the implications of policy, but also, of course, working across government, which is where things like the Net Zero Innovation Board, which brings together the science evidence across a number of different departments, is so important.
Thank you. Paul, I could see you nodding away there, particularly around when both our previous speakers were talking about the consequences of policies for certain modes or sectors impacting on others, and then when Francesca was talking about things like sending signals to the energy sector and the like. What would you add to that?
I haven't got a great deal to add, but I'll just there's a couple of points. I think as a I suppose from my position as a sort of operator and a procurer of ships and maritime technology, we will have to get it from somebody. And of course, therefore, the link between regulation and business models is really key. And the real challenge I have, and it comes back to the point I made earlier on about the opportunity being around people, is that it tends to be, and some of you might disagree with this, but in government particularly, when you're doing procurement, people often tend to work down a checklist, because it's easier to go down a checklist and make sure you're absolutely right rather than taking a risk. And but the real challenge, therefore, is creating teams that are able to understand the regulation and the intent, talk actively to industry, and think about the business model such that we can actually have the flexibility to achieve the real outcome that we want to get to, rather than something that because it ends up being a gain for the policy person who creates the policy, and then the person how it is then delivered from industry. There's a huge gap, and I do think the timelines could be shorter, and I think that would be really interesting, because if the technology is developing at a rate, and then we're all waiting for us to be compliant with with regulation, if there was an anticipated trajectory, then I think it's totally reasonable to, let's say, new ships, new shipping, new infrastructure should be created with the anticipation of utilising that technology. Now, Sarah's point's really key here. I think the reality is it's very difficult when you're trying to spread bet, and especially when you're trying to spread bet against technology and fuel availability across the globe. So for me as a sort of ship operator, ship procurer, where do you put your money? And it's a limited amount of money, and because it's your money, I care about where it's spent. But so I don't know the answer to it. But we do need people who are able to think in regulation terms about the likely implication for the business model and then how that business model is instigated by operators and procurers of ships. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I think that I agree completely, and I think that is one thing that whenever I talk to anybody in the sector, they talk about the complexity and spreading bets and the risk profile of all of this. I get that. So I guess what many of you are saying is the role of government is quite important to send some strong signals which help then the sector make those investments.
If I can come back on it, I think the real challenge, of course, is the conversation.
Yes.
So it can't happen in isolation between the regulator, the operator, procurer, and business. And I think that's what's so great about this.
Thank you.
Session.
Perfect. Catherine, with a view a little bit more outside of the UK, but looking in, how important is all of this what's your view looking into to the UK on when we're thinking about our sector domestically?
So to go back to the original question, the role of policy in driving this change. So I think, the policy signal is really important because it's going to provide that certainty that the sector has been looking for, because like we say, it's all about de-risking investments in the sector. And as we start to de-risk investments, we need that policy signal to provide that little bit of certainty. So, and I think we've seen that with what's happened at the International Maritime Organization with the greenhouse gas strategy that was adopted earlier in July this year. So that really sets out the political will and the clear direction of travel. And I think what's really important about that, Francesco was talking about the nearer term, but it is those indicative checkpoints that are really important, because that is the near term. And I think that's something as well to look at it from a UK perspective, is not just having the long-term goal, but how do we put in the nearer term goals so we can see what is the direction and what is the trajectory of travel for domestic shipping. I think national action has a significant role to play. It's not just about maritime being an international sector and leaving this to the International Maritime Organization. So we have we should look to ensure that shipping is included in national action plans in all countries. And also, I think Sarah's point of linking policy across different government departments, particularly when we start talking about supply side and demand side policies and how they can come together to be able to drive that change. So we know that the UK has a national hydrogen strategy, so how do we link in maritime as a demand sector for that into the national hydrogen strategy. So I think that's where I would sort of say that the national action has a really significant role to play, but we do need to use the national policy to be able to create those enabling environments, so because at the moment the market can't do this on its own, and so how do you bring the market and policy together to be able to create the right enabling environment so that action can be taken both now, today, in the near term, as well as knowing the longer term trajectory.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, providing certainty and enabling those environments. I couldn't agree more. I've got one more pre-prepared question. So I'm just giving you a heads up. We will have time for some floor questions, and I hope you've all been thinking really hard on those difficult ones in particular. And feel free to choose whoever you think you can make most uncomfortable. Right. That was a lovely segue, I think, there, Catherine, to my final set question, which was around how can the UK best fit and have a role and support ambitious decarbonisation internationally? And actually, I think I'll stay with you there, Catherine, I think, for that. And maybe you can set the scene for the others to follow.
Yeah, so I think we can look at already what role has the UK played in the outcome at the IMO, and a significant role. And I think keeping 1.5 on the table and within reach. So really using the science to be able to guide the policy outcomes, and to be able to use your national action as examples of what, as a learning experience to be able to take into the international forum as well. I think the Clydebank Declaration and the Green Corridors was an example of how the UK fits into supporting ambitions internationally as well, to be able to work bilaterally and plurilaterally across with other countries to create frameworks and the environment for these first mover green corridor routes. So I think there's some really good examples, and I think if we continue along this trajectory using the Clean Maritime Plan and the national actions as learnings to be able to take into the international cooperation spaces as well. So, and I think now it's about, as we move now into the hard bit, which is about implementation of the greenhouse gas strategy, and so really to be able to make sure that we maintain the momentum, we keep to the timelines that have been set, and we make sure that the forthcoming policy measures and regulations are aligned to the goals of the trajectories that are set out in the strategy, and I think just to keep making that momentum, keep moving forward.
Thank you. Francesco, if I can come to you, because I guess the industry view, you look at things like the IMO negotiation and UK government and regulators negotiating. So I'd welcome your view from an industry perspective. And I guess the sort of secondary question, if I may, which is how important is the relationship between industry and government when we're going into things like that?
The communication in this sector, in shipping, is fundamental in any possible level, okay? It's fundamental when you are running a vessel and you need to make happy the charter, the customer, and all the rest. And it's fundamental also when we are sitting here and we are discussing together, okay? Now, I'm part of the UK delegation at the IMO, okay? So I meet with government representatives. We discuss our position before I meet with MCA. And one thing that we need to do is building together this current working plan, okay? And possibly another things that we need to think better for the future is, sometimes what is happening is there are national regulations that they might go against the international organization. So now the international organization, for example, let's set up target. Let's set up a similar target nationally. If the international is talking now of technical and economical measure, let's make clear as UK what is our position. Let's make clear this is an important point for the industry. We need a technical and an economical measure. We need this because only in this way we will send a clear signal, okay? And we want the UK to express this clearly at the IMO level, okay? If we are not sending the clear signal with the economical measure that should be separated, should support and close the gap between fuel, we are risking not to create the funding necessary to transform international organization. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Paul, if I may turn to your perspective on this, and I guess a secondary question for me to the original question about how can the UK best fit and support decarbonisation internationally, I guess is how closely do you as well watch what happens in the outside of the grey fleet world and the IMO negotiations, and how much does that affect you, I guess?
I think so. I haven't got a great deal to say on this one. It's probably the most one that's out of my league, so I'm going to absolutely leave it to my friends on the panel. And it's actually having listened to, particularly Catherine's role. It's really struck me a chord. Obviously, most of the, when you're going back to the question about where can the UK best lead, clearly in the world that I look at, it's very, very competitive. But the one thing that binds us together is the climate challenge. And so I see an absolute opportunity in areas where we have to be pretty robust with some really challenging situations, that there's a huge opportunity to build bridges around solving the climate change problem and the ability to share technology and ways of operating. It's absolutely a global world for a variety, both our friends and those who maybe aren't so close to our way of thinking. So I think so when we, from a maritime perspective, it's often at sea in the global commons where that brings us together. I've obviously operated, for example, in counter-narcotics and counter-drug trafficking operations, counter-piracy operations, with Chinese vessels and indeed even with the Russians a few years ago. So I just emphasise that it's an opportunity that when we think very broadly, the UK's leadership in this particular area should be something that we should be really proud of, but it needs to be seen within the broader context of how we interact with, particularly, I would imagine, China, given the scale of the flow of trade from that part of the world. You mentioned looking outside the grey fleet. The interesting thing about the grey fleet is very diverse. Most of my time at the moment is actually looking about how to be somewhere and not be there. So the movement of large platforms which require high amounts of energy to much smaller drone technology, so that we can achieve the same effect with not just a much smaller operational footprint, but a much smaller green footprint. So I'm actually much more interested in the flow of energy. So the energy, to be honest with you, the Royal Navy has always been concerned about energy since the days of sail, going back to the minister's point, because obviously, coaling stations around the world pre-positioning it. So I think, and this is my final point, it goes back down to geography of the UK. The UK is ideally suited for the blue and green hydrogen trade with Europe. So the decarbonisation of other countries and our near partners, it can be facilitated by the UK. So the UK's lead in port infrastructure, the technology to allow autonomous vessels to come in and out of ports, the associated business models, I actually think will be a fundamental part of it. And the Royal Navy is very interested in that, because that is absolutely the same technology is critical to some of the operations we've taken to be put into place. So, for example, some of you would have seen that we've got an RFA Proteus, which we bought deliberately off the spot market. And we've got in protecting underwater cables. In fact, she goes to sea tomorrow. She is operating all sorts of autonomous technology, which is replacing, in reality, fleets of ships. So all of that together for us is quite an interesting picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Sarah, if I may turn to you now, to wrap up this question, I guess.
Yeah, so if we sort of consider the international perspective from a science and engineering point of view, there's a couple of things I think it's worth reminding ourselves of. First of all, I was just trying to remember, I think it was only last week, but it feels like months ago, that we had the announcement that we're rejoining Horizon Europe from a collaboration as a full partner. And that is so important for the science community. Because we know that through partnering with academic and industry colleagues in our European countries, then we can start to really, really accelerate the progress and the understanding towards some of the solutions that will emerge. Now, one of the key factors that was absolutely critical in getting that reassociation with Horizon Europe was the recent formation of the new Government Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. And this is one of those things that has been at the forefront of my work ever since it was formed. I actually can't remember when that was, late last year, beginning of this year. But of course, in the outside world, it probably hasn't had quite so much resonance. One of the things that's absolutely at the core of the mission of the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology is something called the Science and Technology Framework. And the Science and Technology Framework outlines what is needed to make the UK a science superpower. And what that basically says is, we know we've got a really strong knowledge economy in the UK, but we also know we've had, in some cases, a pretty checkered track record in taking that really outstanding fundamental science and discovery and making sure it carries through into business, innovation and economic value. And so the work of the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology really tries to address and overcome that challenge. Now, there are 5 technologies that are priority technologies for that strategy. They are artificial intelligence, engineering biology, communications, semiconductors and quantum technologies. And you probably sit there and think, well, what's that got to do with maritime decarbonisation? Well, it's a really important fundamental basis for many of the discoveries that will help us decarbonise the maritime sector. And I'll just pull out 2. The first is artificial intelligence. On Monday, I think it was Monday, this week's been a bit of a blur for me. I dread to think what it's like for the maritime team themselves. I was with the Secretary of State on a round table looking at opportunities for application of artificial intelligence in the maritime sector. And there were a number of really key opportunities that came out. I think one of the things that was understood by everyone around the room was the way in which artificial intelligence can be seen in partnership with the changes in fuels, the changes in infrastructure that we know are so important. As an example, thinking about how artificial intelligence can be used to dynamically manage and influence the speed at which crafts are travelling so that we can minimise fuel use, minimise waiting time near ports, for example. We can also think about the role of artificial intelligence in regulation, in understanding the composition of fuels, in understanding the way in which different energy types are being used, and actually help industry make decisions about what might be the right solutions for them within their part of the sector. But the other one I just want to pull out, which is a little bit of a wild card and something I think we should all be keeping a bit of a watching brief on, is engineering biology. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in engineering biology, but those much wiser than me are doing an awful lot of work thinking about new ways in which we can manufacture and create new types of fuel solutions. And so we may see some breakthrough technologies that can have a real impact in sectors like maritime in the future that come from that fundamental research in engineering biology. So I think that from an international point of view, that theme of partnership still comes through, but also the opportunity for leadership and the opportunity for economic prosperity as a result of that science and innovation is something that I think we should all be really mindful of as well.
Thank you. So a great wrap-up. Thank you very much. I took an awful lot from that. I've made some notes, so perhaps I'll summarise before we wrap up later. Okay, there are some roving microphones. Sorry, I've got light here. Yes, I can see lots of hands coming up. So Bonnie and Danny, please, you just pick somebody and grab them. Can I ask that when you ask your question, if you could just say very briefly who you are, and then if your question is directed at anybody in particular, if not, we can open it up to the entire panel. So I think the gentleman at the back there.
Thanks. Simon Bullock from the University of Manchester. It's a question really for Catherine and Sarah, I think. Should the Clean Maritime Plan also include policies to cut the UK's share of international shipping emissions and not just the domestic shipping emissions?
Who wants to take that?
That's an interesting question. You could look at international emissions in UK waters, I think. Is that maybe what you're referring to? Great. I would say, I'm going to say yes then. I think because obviously when you look at it from a technology and there's a lot of sharing that goes across that space and so I think if it's all included and together, then I think the sharing of technology and the transfer of technology between international and domestic shipping is something that brings about more opportunity within the UK. So I think when we're looking at international emissions in UK waters, it could be included in the Clean Maritime Plan.
want to come in on that, Sarah?
I mean, yes, so I'm not in any way an expert in policy, but I have actually, since I've been in the department for the last 2 years, become much more familiar with the relationship between policy ambitions and the way that that plays out in the science and engineering and the sort of development and demonstration community. So I would agree with Catherine, who I should thank for taking the question first, that yes, but I think we should also work through what the consequences of that might be, because one of the things that is absolutely bleeding obvious, but makes a difference in the maritime sector, is that if we're looking at most of the things that we're thinking about with fuel is a trade-off between weight, efficiency, cost, and therefore we want to make sure that when any vessels are travelling to another location, we understand what the refuelling opportunities are in that other location. And so, it's not always essential from a maritime point of view, if we compare to, say, aviation, but it's still a really important factor. By including international, it gives much more of a steer towards thinking about working internationally in places both like shore power, but also thinking about that whole energy system from an international point of view. We need to crack that really, really difficult question, and if there are policies that can help provide focus on that challenge around international distribution of energy, then I would certainly welcome it. But Francesco, I think you want to come in as well.
There were some very good points by both Catherine and Sarah. Catherine was telling before that there are some international actions that have effect at the national level, but it's also vice versa, okay? We know, for example, Green Corridor, they will have effect also internationally, okay? So if the Clean Maritime Plan push further for Green Corridor, it will push further for having an effect at the international level. When you are doing your UK shore competition, you are helping also international business. Possibly we need to think to have this scheme a bit more open for telling, for giving also opportunity to vessels that are not under the UK flag, but they are working in the UK. And this can help all to cut international target, okay?
Thank you. Thank you. It's a very good question, that Simon. I'm going to take MC prerogative and just add my own reflection to that. I think the comments made are right. I think what's really important as we're thinking about the Clean Maritime Plan is I want to set the expectation that it's obviously going to be updated again. I don't think that when we set the CMP out at the end of this year that's going to be it until 2050. The measures that are going to be discussed and then over the next 2 years in the IMO will obviously have an impact on what we can do in the UK. And at the back of our minds, or at the forefront of our minds actually, in particular in ministers, is that what we don't want to do is double count. We also don't want to disproportionately impact on any sector. So whatever we do here in the UK in terms of policy or regulatory measures must be commensurate with what comes out the IMO. So I do want to reassure people of that. So whatever we say in the CMP, it is certainly in the global context. We can't silo the two. Right. A whole host of other questions, and I'm really sorry. You should all have numbers so I know who to go to next. So Danny, you choose one. Thank you. If you can introduce yourself as well.
Nicole Leary from Opportunity Green, an environmental NGO. And actually, I was going to ask that question first, so I'm really glad Simon did, which gives me the opportunity to ask a different one, which is some of the Pacific Islands, the most climate vulnerable countries in the world, have a very clear proposal on the table in the IMO for a levy on international shipping. And so my question to the panel is, considering how little tax shipping pays and contributes to general taxation because of the tonnage tax regime, which is incredibly favourable to the shipping industry, should the UK not be putting its full support behind that Pacific Island proposal for a levy?
Okay, who would like to tackle that one? Francesco, go ahead.
I agree. I was telling before with you that we need two separate measures, okay? we need to arrive at the end with the technical and economical measure. Now, we don't know what is this economical measure, okay? Can be a levy, can be something else, okay? We are still discussing. But we need a strong economical signal, okay? Only if we are giving a strong economical signal, we are telling that the different price between fuel, between technology and energy, that they can help us in the transition, the gap will be resolved, okay? And only if we are doing this and we create a fund from this money, we can make the transition happen, okay? And it's very important when we are doing all these measures that we are thinking on a well-to-wake basis, okay? It's very easy doing a measure on a tank-to-wake and move emission on upstream, okay? When we are talking of the technical measure, we need to think on a well-to-wake basis. And the last point that I want to make on this is that I was telling before, I want the UK government to come with a clear stance on where we stand on economical and technical measures. Thank you.
Catherine?
Yeah, I think just one point I would make, and I'm not going to say whether, you know, pro or against any particular measure, but I think, you know, the important piece of this, and I think if you rightly, you know, you reference the Pacific Islands, I think the important piece of this is to make sure that any measure that the UK government or any other government supports is the fact that, you know, this is about a just and equitable transition. And, you know, I don't want to use this forum to get into the pros and cons of the different types of economic measures. I think as long as that, the measures that are designed and adopted are about, you know, ensuring that we have a just and equitable transition, I think that's what needs to remain at the forefront when we now move into this design period. And I don't want to preempt any of that work that is starting and kicking off soon around the comprehensive impact assessment. So we'll leave it there.
Thank you, Catherine. That was a great question. Okay, we've lots of hands down here, over here at the front, and some more over here. So, thanks, Danny.
Hi.
You're on.
Sorry. John Hood from Transport and Environment. We're an independent think tank. I'd like to bring some numbers into this, if I may. The government's published Carbon Budget Delivery Plan earlier this year assumes that in 2035, about 1/3 of all UK shipping energy needs to be low carbon. Now, my organisation's looked at this, and we found that to meet those assumptions, you would need, using renewable fuels and electricity, you would need almost all of the UK's current installed wind power to generate that much energy. Now, our organisation suggests that the UK needs a visionary policy and regulatory framework to decarbonise shipping. The Course to Zero consultation last year was quite clear that the Clean Maritime Plan will contain indicative-only targets. So my question is very straightforward. Will the CMP be enough? Thank you.
Who wants to take that? Shall I start? Okay. Damn it. Okay, no, that's a really good question. Will the CMP be enough? Well, we have, as the UK, we have the 2050 net zero target, and we do have the carbon budgets plan and the carbon budget periods. I agree. So what are we thinking of as we're developing the CMP? So yes, we're going to be putting in there some indicative goals on the pathway to 2050. But our objective in that is indeed to meet those carbon budget 6 plan, and in particular the carbon budget 6 period, which is the period that 2035 falls into. So will it be enough? So we have I have some wonderful colleagues at the department that recently developed an emissions model for maritime. That is, and I know that they've talked to lots of people in the sector about as that has been developed and what that is beginning to tell us, which is a great tool in allowing us to put in some some numbers about, well, if we put a particular policy measure or a particular regulatory measure in, what would that give us in emission savings? There's an awful lot of assumptions in there, but what we are trying to do is to make sure that we can hit those carbon budget plans. So will the CMP be enough? I think it's fine to have it down on paper, and I think our CMP on paper will deliver that. But I'm going to come back to what the Secretary of State spoke about yesterday, and which I think has been a common thread through the past few days that I've heard, which is about we can't individually do all this alone. And the only way that we're going to be able to hit what we set out in the plan and to clean maritime up is to work together. And it's all about this partnership bit. We've some great examples out there when it comes to the R&D side of things. But you're right, we do need those policy and those regulatory measures to enable the sector to deliver on that. I'm under no illusion that it's going to be really challenging. But I think on paper it will. I think the proof will be whether we can collectively deliver on it. And I don't think that is all on the sector or all on government. It's got to be a real collaboration. But yeah, it's going to be a challenge. Does anybody want to add?
I'm happy to come in, and now you've given me a bit of thinking time to just to add a little bit. So you're absolutely right, and I mean, again, I'm relatively new to this sector, and for me, the numbers are pretty mind-blowing. So I was doing some research for something else I'm doing, and looking at the typical power that's used by shore power for a cruise ship, and the anticipated requirements for a connection for shore power is 20 megawatts. Now, to put that in context, if that was on, it wouldn't be on 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. But if it was, that's around 3 times the amount of power that's used by Stansted Airport. So according to their, I think, 2021, 22 sort of output figures. So the numbers are absolutely enormous, and therefore it doesn't surprise me, and we had a quick chat earlier, I really value the work that Transport and Environment do, and we need those data sets to keep emerging into the sector to help us all understand what's happening. I think something else that I'll just say is really helpful alongside the policy outcomes that emerge through things like the Clean Maritime Plan are technology roadmaps. Actually, in the UK, we're not brilliant at having clear technology roadmaps, and it's something that we've discussed across Chief Scientific Advisor communities, and I can see colleagues here from Innovate UK. One of the documents that was produced a couple of years ago and is now being updated is something called Transport Vision 2050, which tries to provide some foresight into potential technology roadmaps that could help with the community. But I do think that Eamon's point about working in partnership is absolutely essential. If I think of an analogy with the automotive sector that I know some of you also engage with, actually at the moment progress is looking really good in terms of electric vehicle sales, for example, actually ahead of some of the projections. But the concern is, are we going to make sure that we have the right charge point infrastructure to enable to maintain that trajectory of purchase and also support a second-hand vehicle market? The way in which I observe that team working is through very close interaction with some of the industry bodies. I know that organisations like Maritime UK are absolutely essential to the work of my colleagues in the department, and I think that making sure we've got the right structures like the Clean Maritime Council to help ensure that once we've got the policies out there, we've also got that continual engagement to be able to understand what's really happening within the sector, working out the nuances of the different ways in which the funding mechanisms or the partnerships and initiatives are delivered through government is really important as well. So I think that's just something else that we ought to add to that consideration.
Paul?
Yeah, I was really thinking about this. It's a really pressing one. I mean, I've worked in the ships with 8 megawatts. I'm going to go one quick point. We obviously own ports as well, or operate ports. And the reality is, if you're waiting for the rest of the infrastructure to come up behind you so you can do this, you're not going to get there. We're investing in our own green waste, recycling energy plants in ports of naval base, as an example. So the incentives for us to do that, and then for expect the shipping to be able to plug into that to get ahead of the game, is absolutely key. But if you're waiting for the rest of the infrastructure to catch up, there's always an excuse not to do it. So I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why we're doing it. It's a good business model, but completely, it's a huge problem, and it's got to be driven. I think a lot of it's got to be driven by the infrastructure, and of course the interconnection between the expectation that the ships will move into that power, and then be able to the whole power chain that moves forward, and some of the technological innovation that Sarah was talking about, really taking up as soon as it comes up to try and drive that loading down.
Thank you, Francesca.
And like Paul was telling, we had an example now. We have Maersk is invested money now in biomethanol to start creating for them their supply. And this supply can help other business to get biomethanol, okay? But not all players are Maersk in the industry. And it's for this that there is need of investment from different government. We need an international economical measure. And John, your point is true, it's very scary, and Sarah also is in agreement. There is so much fuel that is needed for this transition, alternative fuel, alternative energy, and we don't know how much of this will arrive on a ship, okay? And because we don't know this, it's very important what Paul was telling. We need to improve energy efficiency, but not only on ship. Ship have done a lot. We need to improve energy efficiency in all upstream. If you are improving energy efficiency in the upstream, it's like a snowball effect, okay? And this new fuel, they are less dense. So if you are saving more of this fuel, you are getting a lot more that is arrived at the end on board on the vessel. And there is another technology that can save us from all this lack of fuel. We have not yet talked, is carbon capture, okay? If we are not having all this green fuel, a way that we can reduce emission is carbon capture. And UK is in very advanced stage of developing system as a geological advantage. We have a manufacturer capability. We should put our head in.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. This is, I don't know how it's coming across down there, but I'm loving this. But unfortunately, I don't want to keep you all from your coffee either. So I think we've probably got time for one more question. So that gentleman over there, his hand shot up in the high-vis jacket over there. So everybody else, you were just too slow. I'm very sorry. And then I will attempt to wrap up what I think has been a fascinating session.
On. Am I on? Yes, I am. Thank you. Can I say thank you very much for giving me the chance to get hold of this magic wand.
Huh.
I spent all day yesterday listening to the great and good predicting the future. But I want to take you to the past. You see what's written on my back. Ask me about laminated concrete. So I want to take you back to previous problems and introduce you to concrete ships. For emphasis, concrete ships. For emphasis again, concrete ships. Why? Because I have the technology to produce concrete ships better than was done in the First World War and the Second World War. And they are less capitally expensive to produce, and they will last longer. And if they are made into big floating warehouses on the ocean, and we take advantage of tides and winds, as the past captains of clipper ships used to move the cargoes around the world, we would make a significant contribution to a new way of transporting materials about. I have a PowerPoint with me, and I could talk till the cows come home. And I would like very much to talk individually to the panel, but it's perhaps my time is up. But if I get the opportunity to speak further, please let me do so. It's cost me a lot of money to come down to London to do this.
I'm absolutely sure they'll be happy to sort you over a coffee break. But perhaps there's a question there, actually. Thank you very much. Sarah, which I'll come to you, and maybe you can close up as well, is what could we learn from the past when it comes to new technologies and innovation?
I think that's a really, really excellent way of sort of framing the challenge. So one of the things I did actually when I joined the department, I was quite the previous chief scientific advisors appear to it seems to have good longevity as a role, which I'm quite pleased about, because I was able to speak to I think all of the previous chief scientific advisors, and they gave me really, really helpful advice about the role of science advice within the department. But also, in the role of Chief Scientific Advisor, I'm very privileged because lots of people do just approach me and wish to sort of share their views. And I really try and listen, because there are lots and lots of things that we can sort of learn from past innovation and invention. I think the first thing is that I'm going to give an example. I come from the University of Nottingham, and the University of Nottingham is very proud to host the Sir Peter Mansfield Centre, which is the home of the invention of magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, that many of you will now see deployed in almost every hospital in the UK. It's really worth reading Sir Peter Mansfield's description of his path to that invention. And his conclusion was that if he was starting in a university today, he would have failed, because he would have been under pressure to deliver outcomes too quickly. So I think one of the things that we can think about is how we can stimulate the right culture within industry and within universities, because invention happens in all sorts of places, whether it's individual, small and medium-sized enterprises like we support through our Transport Research Innovation grants, or in the more structured world of universities. Thinking about making sure that we allow time for ideas to develop, permeate, be discussed, because very often, actually, those ideas take a different path. I don't think Sir Peter Mansfield quite understood exactly what it was he was discovering when he discovered it. But because he was embedded in a place where others could work with him, and we were right next to a hospital where that technology could be exploited when it became much more sort of viable, then things really started to develop. So I think we can learn about how to support a culture of invention, such as we just heard from there. But also, there are some really, really great technologies that we are starting to rediscover. I'm not going to suggest that the policy should be to go back to sailing ships, but sailing ships are a beautiful piece of aerodynamics. And so thinking about the fundamentals of engineering that have been at the absolute forefront of the maritime industry for hundreds of years, and making sure that we embed that high-quality engineering analysis and discovery as we're taking the technologies forward is really important. I do lots of talks where I talk about how concerned we are about not having new technical skills within the transport sector generally, but we mustn't throw away the really important skills that are already absolutely critical. And I'm really interested to hear actually from the Rear Admiral, because I think that what we need to understand is the fundamental experience of those who are working within the maritime sector, and how we can learn from that and bring that through in the innovations as well.
Would you want to respond?
Well, first of all, can I ask the gentleman's name who spoke earlier on? Sorry.
My name is Michael Pemberton from Trafalgar Marine Technology, COP26 Limited, and I'm an expert in laminated ferrocement for shipbuilding.
Well, Michael, thank you. Well, thank you for your question. I think it's, do you know what, it's just absolutely fantastic to meet people who are hugely passionate about things. And I think you know, that I find that really inspiring. So thank you. Sarah's absolutely right. I think the real challenge, I think, for when you're operating in ships is and indeed in any business where you're investing a huge amount of money, is the preparedness to take risk. And of course, in my world, I have to take risk, because otherwise we lose. And in that, of course, the people that you bring in to make the decisions, how do you get the right amount of conflict and manage it so that you can really test ideas? So I noticed there's multiple universities here. and obviously people from industry. So most of my time is actually dedicated to creating the right team and the environment to be able to bring solutions together. And then, of course, convincing people to spend money, that this is going to work. And what often happens is we've heard the valley of death we've got millions of ideas, we can hand out loads of money in penny packets, and then, of course, it never really moves into it. And then, of course, there's the vested interests of big business. And on the other part of London, we've got DSEI, which is awash with arms dealers who obviously, the whole industry is designed to keep you an updated version of the last product. But in the climate change scenario, it's such a pressing and emergent problem that you've got to look at much more broadly at opportunities that come out. I mean, Sarah mentioned AI, absolutely fundamental. So this is my final point. How do we create a modelling environment where new technology can be put into it, so you can put your problem there and then see a variety of different solutions come out, and then have the right people to recognise you can make a move to that decision. So it comes back, it's come back even to where I started. It's all about people and finding the right people. And I think what's great about this is there's a huge diversity. It needs to be more. Thank you.
Please don't apologise, because that was half my wrapping up. So that was brilliant. Thank you, everybody. That was fascinating. I'm really sorry that we couldn't take everybody's questions, but please do. If you want to grab any of the panel and they're around, then please do. A couple of other points, if I may, that really jumped out at me, and I'm never going to capture everything, so please, but these are the ones that jumped out at me. So you both just very, very eloquently talked about the right culture for invention, and be prepared to take the risks, and setting the right framework for ideas and development to foster. I think that's absolutely key, particularly when we're talking about some of the things we're talking about today. Other things that came out to me was the role of government and the CMP and things like that to set the right signals and the near-term goals and how important they are. And Catherine, you talked very eloquently about the role of national plans in providing some certainty for the sector, and then the role that they can play when it comes to the international framework and context and negotiations. So a huge amount. I can't even begin to summarise properly, but I'm going to end on one thing that really jumped out at me, which was something that you said, Paul, which was that climate change really binds us together, and I think that and that we've a responsibility to address that in our sector. So I think on that I will finish, and if you can all please show your appreciation to the panel. Okay, you are now released into the wild. Coffee is downstairs. The next session starts at 11:30, so if you could please begin to make your way up here around 25 past. And the next bit is all about green corridors. Thank you. here that says, welcome back everyone and thank you for being back at your seats so promptly. But I did finish the last session a little late, so perhaps I can take some of the blame for that. Thank you for joining us for this session. We had a fantastic morning for those that weren't here. But we're now moving on to our next item agenda. Thankfully, I'm not going to be standing up here. You have my colleague Alex, and I'll bring her up in a minute, so you can get some respite from my Mancunian accent. So we heard the exciting news from the Secretary of State earlier today that we're launching a new International Green Corridor Fund. And I'm going to hand over to the head of UK Shore, Alexandra Beaumont, to give you an update on our Green Corridor work, including this new fund, and lead a panel discussion with some of our international partners who we have been working with closely to progress Green Corridors. So, Alex, please, the floor's yours. There you go, good luck.
Well, hello. So, yes, as Eamon's happily introduced, we've had obviously an excellent day today of announcing this Green Shipping Corridor, International Green Shipping Corridor Fund with our international partners. Really pleased to be here in this space. And also, I just wanted to say as well, we've had an excellent week. A few people have said this, but I'm really energised by everything that's happened this week. Had so many really good conversations about green shipping corridors and future propulsion methods and all of the different things that need to go together to make decarbonising and reducing emissions in this sector possible. So I just wanted to say it's been an excellent week. Thank you to everybody that I've met so far to talk about green corridors, and really enthused to be able to continue this conversation today. So, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the UK Shipping Office for Reducing Emissions is doing in the Green Corridor space to build on the excellent announcement this morning. I've got a clicker. So where do we sit? So the Government Maritime Decarbonisation Programme, it's made up of 3 different chunks. So we've got a little bit of domestic policy and regulation in that space, which is to do with some of the things on the Clean Maritime Plan that you heard about earlier today. And that's sort of a really important part of the work we're doing, because we want to really sort of engage with the sector and look at sort of how the policy framework can work for the future as well. And sort of building into that framework for the future, we're really keen on sort of the work that we've done on international policy and regulation as well. But where we sit with UK Shipping Office for Reducing Emission is in the domestic research and development space. So, as I'm sure you already know by this point, that's the £206 million research and development programme, which is designed to create this pipeline of acceleration through the technology readiness levels. So, this is us, UK Shore. This is the pipeline that I was just talking about. So the idea behind this really is, as you will hopefully be aware by this point, is to have this sort of transition, this acceleration through the technology readiness levels from sort of early research with things like the EPSRC Research Hub that you'll have heard about today, and also with sort of some of the research grants that we've been talking about as well, but also then sort of pushing that forwards really through the technology readiness levels with the Clean Maritime demonstration competitions in the mid-range there, with some demonstrator projects mixed into that, but then also sort of going up towards the higher end of the technology readiness levels with ZEVI and some of the work in that space, which again is really critical, because sort of that for the first time is doing what we think we need to do for the future, which is sort of both generating that sort of onshore and on vessel side of technology, so we can see it working together. And so Green Corridors actually fits into that quite neatly as well, because what the Green Corridors can also do is show the two sides of the equation, really, in terms of how does something run actually in the real world? How could it move from one country to the other, and what sort of fuel types and what are the demand challenges and supply challenges on on that sort of thing to really make it work. And so that's why we're really thrilled today to be able to announce the excellent feasibility studies work that we're going to do with our colleagues that will be on the panel shortly, and really, really enthusiastic for the sort of work and the outputs that that's going to create. So I just thought I'd do a little bit of an update on sort of what we've done so far. So we funded some of these feasibility studies already, 1.1 through the 1.1 million through some of the CMDC rounds to look at 3 feasibility studies already. And that's sort of currently done a couple of routes sort of between Dover and Calais and Dunkirk, and sort of some of the Clean Maritime shipping corridor, to name but a few. And that's really worked. And so what we wanted to do was build on top of that and sort of take some of the ideas and the sort of ways that has worked so far in terms of looking at potential routes and how that could work, and then really take that to a next step, which has both sides sort of bilaterally doing it, because then what we can do from that is actually understand how it works on our side and on sort of the other side as well, and look at really sort of the information and how it works together. So just sort of summarising our aims for green shipping corridors, really. So there is still research and development, it's still in the sort of feasibility study sort of space, but it's not just that, because what we're also doing is working with industry in this as well. And so the idea behind it is that as well as sort of doing feasibility studies and working with sort of our excellent colleagues in our partner countries with this fund, we're also convening industry and setting up task forces. A good example of this is the US to UK Green Shipping Corridor Task Force that we have put together collectively off the back of some of the Clydebank work. And that's, again, really important because that's also starting to bring our sector into the picture as well. But a key part of UK Shore and everything we do is evidence and dissemination. And this is, again, a part of the Green Shipping Corridors work as well. Because what we'd really like to do is get to a place where we have shown some of the options, some of the potential to the sector about what could happen and how things could be moved forwards. Because a lot of the UK Shore work is really about understanding the opportunities and then being able to sort of support the sector in making some decisions for how then we move forwards for the future of maritime decarbonisation and emissions reduction. So a pipeline of green corridors, we don't want it just to be a feasibility study and then done. As I said, it's also about having agreements in place, having task forces to really create a coalition of the willing, embrace that appetite for being early movers in this space. So this is a little bit of just a cross-section of some of the work we're doing. As you'll see, we've got the feasibility studies mentioned there as part of the International Green Corridors Fund that we've announced today, but also some of the work we're doing on sort of task forces and agreements. And I'm very happy to talk to anyone about sort of what we're doing specifically with any of these countries, but if I talked to that now, be here for a while. So the International Green Corridor Fund, you've heard a little bit about it already, but basically what we're doing with this is, as has been already talked about, £1.5 million of UK Shore funding, which will then be sort of collaborative with Norway, Denmark and the Netherlands as well. And the idea behind that is these will create sort of feasibility studies between us and those countries, which we can then, as I talked about in the previous slide, start to move that towards sort of bringing the sector along with us as well and providing that information to the sector for how we can move for the future as well. So you don't want to hear a lot from me. I'll talk to you a little bit more about this, I'm sure, as part of the panel, but actually, let's talk as well to our excellent partners in the Green Corridor Shipping Fund. And so can I invite to the stage Brigitte, Sveinung and Jacob from our fund partners. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining me on the stage. And I think, so just to kick off, if you'd like to maybe give a bit of an introduction about each of you before, to ease you in before I ask the first, obviously really difficult question.
Good morning. My name is Brigitte Gijsbers. I'm the Deputy Director General for Civil Aviation and Maritime Affairs in the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in the Netherlands. And like the UK, also for the Netherlands, the greenhouse gas emissions and the reductions of that are very important. So we're active, of course, in IMO together with our colleagues here. And we think that we really need some forerunners to make sure that the strategy we set out in July in IMO, that we make steps and not wait a long time, close to 2050, but really start today or tomorrow. And we think that green corridors are a good possibility to start even with the existing legislation, which may not fit, but still you have to start with pilots and presentation ships and see what is necessary. So we are very willing to work together with the UK and other countries on the green corridors.
Thank you.
And then I guess I'm the next. My name is Svein Oftedal. I'm the Chief Negotiator on Green Shipping from the Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment. So my task is, one arm is in the international arena and one arm is in the domestic arena, but both arms come together on the green corridor approach, meaning that we are working with this in Norway on the domestic arena and also then together with our partners, including then the UK, to make this happen at an early stage. So I guess we will discuss the various specifics on it, but when we signed the Clydeback Declaration, which was a very important initiative by the UK, which my minister is very keen to, let's say, fulfill his task in the follow-up, that clearly also set the priority from our side. So I think that's enough for me.
So my name is Jakob Haugaard. I'm Director for Climate and Green Transition in the Danish Maritime Authority. Like Sveinung, I also deal with both international negotiations but also domestic issues related to the decarbonisation of shipping. But talking about what we do on green corridors, we work at 3 levels. We are also signatory to the Clydeback Declaration. We have also signed up to a Nordic declaration on green ferry routes. So again, at a policy level, we're there. We then work at a regional level with the partnerships, both with the UK, with these concrete projects. We work through the International Public-Private Partnership, the Zero Emission Shipping Mission, where we also deal with the concrete tools to facilitate green corridors. We have projects under the Council of Nordic Ministers, where we work together. And then at the national level, we address green corridors in 2 ways. Firstly, through a new partnership on ports with the private sector, where we discuss how should we facilitate, how should we prepare for green corridors in Denmark, and this partnership will then provide guidance for a new port strategy. And then we also deal with approval processes, because one thing is talking about investment decisions and policy decisions, but another thing is to be ready at your own ports. So we discuss the port perspective and to be ready with the approval of the new vessels.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think we've talked a lot this week about sort of some of the opportunities and challenges at the various things we've collectively been at. And I think sort of what's clear is that there's quite a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of challenge. I mean, we've discussed earlier in the week some sort of the issues around sort of bridging the cost gap and that sort of thing. So while we have quite a lot of sort of appetite and engagement in this, I think also it would be sort of wrong of us to not also sort of address some of the barriers that we might need to work through. So firstly, I was going to ask sort of what regulatory challenges might arise that we then need to sort of work through collectively. And feel free to obviously say positive things about how well that's going to obviously go. But yeah, I think let's talk a little bit about how we can work together on regulatory challenges bilaterally.
Yeah, I mentioned already the existing legislation, and new technologies will not well, part they fit into the old legislation. So we have to make sure that we give the ability and arrange that experiments can go on, and that you can start with pilots to get on both sides experience with the new technologies, but also learn from the experiences in practice to make your legislation, to make the new legislation. So I think that's a very important one. But the pilots and the presentation ships will bring lots of knowledge, both to the ports, to the ships, to the governments. So we have to work on that, and especially as governments, we can facilitate in the process of certificating, in making sure that the ports are aligned, but also the renewable fuels you need. That's the ones which the ships will use. That is available in the right amount at the right places. So that's very important. So as a government, you can facilitate, you can give incentives, and make sure that when the legislation is does not fit yet, that still it is possible to do such pilots.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to also take that?
Yeah. This is, let's say, this is not only one set of regulation, because it's several set of regulations, and we all know now, when it comes to the new types of fuels, that there is increased activity at the IMO to have more specific requirements now, first in the form of guidelines for ammonia and hydrogen, instead of the, let's say, an alternative method of approval, which need to take place now, which is requiring a lot of work for the various administrations, etc., etc. But it's also, you will meet local authorities, because Green Corridors is about making this real, making the whole green economy, the function, meaning from the green fuel production to the infrastructure to the ships able to use and actually using the zero-emission fuels. And then there will be also issues where you will need to meet the local authorities, to have permits. So the list of barriers is there, and we are now working to resolve them. And the best way to resolve them is through then active private-public partnerships, and then also a partnership across borders. We have examples, for instance. It's not an operation between Norway and Denmark, but the Norway and another neighboring country, which is hybrid operation. It's a RoPax vessel, having then a huge battery package which can be charged in the port in Norway, so we can operate on zero emission into the port. But on the other side, it's not Denmark, another country, it cannot be done because of various reasons. So the point is, the various regulations which is there now as some kind of barriers, I think we are working hard to resolve them, and needs to be resolved in order to make this possible for the private sector to operate safely on zero-emission shipping.
Well, from a government perspective, we see three kinds of barriers. First of all, we need kind of certification of the alternative fuels, because if we don't have that, how can the private sector get assurance that they buy the right type of fuels? So that's one issue. A second issue is to get approval processes working on the new dual fuel vessels. So while we're waiting for the guidelines from IMO on alternative fuels, we need to do something. So in Denmark, we've set up what we call a regulatory future lab, so where we meet with the ship owners, and we discuss the design early in the process. So we don't wait for them to come with a final design, but we're there from the very beginning, and we try to find flexible solutions that can work, because we simply cannot wait for the regulatory framework to be fully established. So that's one idea, and we're very much welcome to work with other authorities to share these experiences. That's also why we've set up a regulatory forum where we will share these first experiences and share best practices and the tools that we've made. because it doesn't really make sense that Denmark as a flag state approves a methanol or ammonia ship if other flag states don't approve it. So yeah, so we need to work in partnership. I think that's the key word here.
And I think we can learn from what we did with LNG. LNG was also a very new fuel, and well, lots of people thought that it was quite dangerous, and especially on passenger ships. So, well, we managed with local, make sure that the local communities accept it, make sure that national legislation is ready, international legislation, that other countries accept it as well. So we can learn from that process, and actually LNG is now a very normal fuel, so nobody is afraid for that anymore. So we have to make sure that that will also happen with methanol and ammonia. So I'm sure we can do it together.
Thank you. I mean, that's a lot of interesting ideas there, and I think that's sort of some of the things that I look forward to sort of working with you all on, sort of how we build forwards from that. So at the end of this, I might come back and sort of use Chair's prerogative to ask one more question, but actually also I'd like to sort of open this up to the floor if there's anything that people would like to ask of this panel, or indeed of me if you want to. I think we're just going to get some microphones brought out, but feel free to start raising your hands and we'll get the microphone going around. Okay, great. So I think if we, sorry, can you raise them a little bit higher? Great, thank you. So I think, why don't you want to start down there, please? Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John Garner. Company is QEII Maritime Solutions, and I've been involved with the Dover Consortium on International Green Corridors, regulations and policy, actually. My question to the panel is that some of the early movers with the likes of ammonia and hydrogen that don't yet have an international framework have been quite challenging to get designs through approval processes, right? Yes, they will use the alternative design arrangements, and yes, in the UK, we've got a Marine Guidance Note number 664. However, it is a bottom-up approach, and perhaps every ship and every design, it's a one-off. So my question is, how could we improve that process, procedure, facilitate something that would encourage ship owners to walk towards this process rather than quite a few are backing away from it, if I'm totally honest? Thank you.
Do you want to come in on that as well?
Can I also? Now, that is clearly the situation, and also is a kind of showstopper for both the companies. But first, at this stage, as you say, I think the Maritime Administration would use, let's say, 5 times more man-hours in order to approve a system than they are doing with a conventional system. Now, at the IMO level, there is not specific requirements in the IGF code when it comes to the fuels like ammonia and hydrogen. So meaning then the first stage which will happen there is then in the form of guidelines. Then you have in the form of guidelines more specific requirements which are clear to everybody, which is then easier to prepare for when you are designing your systems. We have submitted proposal for what that should contain when it comes to the ammonia together with our Nordic friends. And that when that is finalized and complete at the IMO, I think we are, let's say, in a situation where we can make it easier to get the approval of these new systems. But I think it is a fact for this period, in these first years, they will require more man-hours, both on the industry side in preparing for designing and also on the authority side in order to get this approval. So that cost will be there. How soon that cost will go down, it's difficult to say, but Berit, you refer to the LNG, is a good example. And I think that story, although it took quite a long time at the IMO as well, will now need to happen because IMO has given now a priority at the safety committee in order to do this. So let's hope we can progress as fast as we can. Okay.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on that question, or should we pick up? No? Oh, sorry, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I fully understand your concern. So it is quite challenging when you have the design and it takes so long time to get the approval processes working. We also need to realize that there are a lot of safety issues that we need to deal with. It's not just to approve a dual fuel engine or dual fuel ammonia vessel. So there's a lot of coordination that has to take place at the national level between different authorities. So we are trying to deal with that as well, because once we have an ammonia-fueled vessel, we need to be ready with the coordination and approval processes. So we're trying to set up kind of a one-stop shop, or at least to coordinate between the authorities. And so that's one thing. And another thing is to have reciprocal approval processes between flag states. That could be a next step, but again, we're still in an early stage, so we're exploring and sharing best practices, and hopefully we can get some results within a few years.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Do we have any more questions from the room? I'm going to come down here.
Dorothy Burke, Oasis Marine. We've developed offshore charging buoys. When there's a multi-country project, how do small technology companies get involved, and how do they know where to go to get involved with their technologies in such interesting projects?
That's quite a big question. Does anyone want to take that? Sorry.
Is there a room, question. The question was, is there a room for smaller companies to take part in this transition? I would say absolutely yes, because I see that in several countries there are, private-public partnerships and cluster programs, which also smaller companies take part in. And at least what we are doing in Norway, where we have a green shipping program with 111 partners from the private sector, also many small companies. When they develop pilot projects, the various companies involved, they share knowledge and share experience, meaning there is a room for smaller companies. And looking into the green corridors approach, where you need to have many let's say, players involved. It's not only one company, it is from various sectors, many players. So what we are trying to do in the Nordic context is to establish a collaboration platform where the companies can join in the collaboration arena in order to work on the green corridors in the Nordic countries. So it's not only for the big ones, also for the small, if they have something to contribute with, some areas of expertise which can be important.
Yeah, the same accounts for the Netherlands. We think it's very important that also the smaller companies are involved, and we launched in April this year the Maritime Master Plan, where we have 210 million euros for 30 zero-emission ships in 2030, and we really focus also on collaboration between different companies, but also make sure that the smaller companies have a place. And yesterday it was quite funny. We had also on this topic meeting between the Netherlands and the UK, and one of the Dutch people in one of the workshops, he said it is quite often more easy for a small company to decide, okay, I'm going for an innovative ship and I'm going to invest, instead of a huge company where you have to go to director 1 and director 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and the share owner in another country, whatever. So in the Netherlands, we see that the most innovative ships are ships from the very small companies.
And I think as well from a UK perspective, that's been borne out as well from some of the UK Shore funding as well, which is there to sort of very much bring in all range of technology and sort of companies into that space as well. Does anyone else have any questions from the audience? Okay, I think, hi Tristan.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I was at the back. Tristan Smith, University College London. Very positive to hear, but one of the things we see on paper and analysis, and we hear countless times in round tables, is that the barrier is the solution to the OPEX challenge. So this is not about capital grants necessarily, which is the ways sometimes governments intervene, but how do we actually provide a business case by saying that the significant gap in operating cost between the conventional fuel and in particular the dark green fuels, the 100% renewable energy produced fuels, which we know are the long run solution that we're going to need very quickly given the outcome at the IMO. Like, how do we stimulate those? And the Global Maritime Forum wrote a very nice paper that was launched on Monday, actually, this week, that I'd recommend to everyone, on the ways in which governments can intervene to help support the OPEX problem that I'm referring to. I wondered if this group had any comments, not necessarily on the paper, but on whether you can seriously engage in helping to support that element of making these things happen in the timescale that we need. Thank you.
Yeah, I can start. You point at a very specific challenge, Tristan. That's right, because if we don't do something at a regulatory level, it will only be the big companies such as Maersk and who buy the dual fuel vessels and can pay for the extra premium for alternative fuels, and there'll be a few some companies, retailers, IKEA, others also who are willing to pay for this extra premium. So I think one of the only solutions to deal with this problem is to look at the economic measures at IMO. And we are very much committed to continuing that discussion for the coming 2 years, where we are to negotiate and then eventually adopt both technical and economic measures in 2025.
Thank you. Can I? Yes. The point is, the point made in the question is very good, because it's not only to be ready for, but it is also about operating on the fuels and prove that you can operate on the zero emission solutions. Now, we know that there is somebody needs to pick up the bill. It is clearly so. What we are doing at the moment in various countries, we have done various support schemes, mainly focusing on the capex and not that much on the opex. And then some countries have been looking into for various industry contracts for difference as one solution to this, but that varies all around the globe. And in some cases, there are some customers who are willing to pay. But this issue is not resolved yet, but it is clearly higher, at least on our agenda, because without resolving the cost issue, you will not have the investment decision taken. But also, the understanding among the industry players is starting to change, because previously all the risk was on the new projects, on the new types of operation, and no risk was on the existing operation and the existing solution. That has changed a little bit. And also looking into the future now, there will be a huge competition on the new types of fuels. So if you are late into that, the question will be, are you at the back of the queue? Will you be able to buy the zero-emission fuels? So meaning the advantage of being earlier to take an early cost is more evident, but that period cannot be long, because otherwise you will go bankrupt. Simple as that. So this problem needs to be resolved. We don't have a recipe fully yet, but at least from our side, we are trying to work on it.
Yeah, it's a problem which is very recognizable, and I think if you look at the EU legislation from 2024 on the European trading system, emission trading system is going into force, and in the Netherlands, not only the government but also the shipping companies, we said it should start from 400 GT on, so also the smaller ships. But, well, in the end we were not, there was no majority for that, so the level is now 5,000 GTs. But it really helps, because if you have to pay for your emission trading system, well, you can instead of that, invest in a cleaner fuel. Well, and next to that, in the Netherlands, the ports are willing to give a reduction on the port fees for cleaner ships, which is very important. You mentioned IKEA, who's willing to pay. There are not a lot of shippers willing to pay, but slowly that is going to change. And the consumer wants to have greener, really green goods. For instance, Heineken in the Netherlands, you recognize the green bottles. That's already a sign that's green. They transport everything within the Netherlands, zero emission. The bottles, the empty bottles, the full bottles to the port of Rotterdam. So we really should see where their transport route is to the UK to bring it on the green corridor as well, and make sure that they are either willing to pay or give long-term contracts, because that also helps. If you know I can ship goods for IKEA or for Heineken or whatsoever for the next 10 years, then you can invest on that, and not if, you do not know if you have a contract in 3 months' time. So there are different ways, and it will all help for a little bit, but in total we should find a solution to close the gap.
Definitely. So I think while I could definitely talk for days about green shipping corridors, I know in the interest of time, so I'm going to wrap up slowly. So I just want to ask to conclude, could you each say, just in a couple of brief words, what's the thing that you're most excited about on the next steps for green shipping corridors?
Well, I think it's great that both UK and the Netherlands have now the possibility to start up with the fund for the feasibility studies, so that we can really make clear what the reduction of the emissions is, what is necessary on the infrastructure side, what is necessary on the procedures, etc., to really start with the green corridors and really make sure that there will be ships, clean ships, making use of these corridors, because only with early adapters who will start with the new fuels, who will start with new technologies, we will be ready to make sure that the whole sector is zero emission in 2050.
Now, what makes me optimistic is that after the Clydeback Declaration, we have had a follow-up with our partners. So that is making, there has been a follow-up on the commitments. In addition, what makes me optimistic is now that we have actually projects from the industry, both when it comes to the green fuel production and infrastructure, but also when it comes to the ships. So the projects are there, and that's quite many of them. And the resolvement of the barriers which our eagles do, I think will bring us from commitments into contracts in the green corridors, and then we can prove it will work.
And I'm very excited by our public-private partnership, the Zero Emission Shipping Mission, where we, together with the industry and many countries, have managed to develop tools for decision makers, both at ports, financial decision makers, for the investments that have to be made for the future ports. We've also come up with a methodology using the expertise from the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Centre for Zero Carbon Shipping to do pre-feasibility studies, etc. So we have started, and we have also started to engage with other countries, not only the usual suspects, because we need to bring also developing countries on board. So we're starting it. We're not going that fast yet, but at least we've come together among a group of countries across continents and with the private sector. So I'm optimistic.
Great, thank you. And definitely echoing that optimism from our perspective as well. So thank you very much. And can I ask you also to thank you, our excellent panel today.
Very much, Alex, and the panel. Thank you. That was fascinating. I think one of my takeaways is, there was an awful lot from that, but I think I'm now beginning to think we might need 2 days at the next LISW for Clean Maritime. Sorry, team. I'm going to move us swiftly on. That was a really interesting and very pertinent panel. And I think on green corridors, and I think there was one thing that really jumped out at me, which I've seen as a thread over the last few days, is the need for demonstrators. And I think particularly when we're talking about international shipping, and green corridors are going to have a really big role as a whole systems approach to demonstrating that. And I think Sveinung, you used the great word of evidence, and I think that's absolutely key. So talking about evidence, we're going to swiftly move on to our next agenda item, which focuses on the other announcement that was made this morning by our Secretary of State, which was the Clean Maritime Research Hub. So we're delighted to have announced the winner of this competition, and we're going to have a little session now which is going to tell you a little bit more about it. So we're going to hear from Jane Sykes from the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, and they're co-funding the hub alongside the UK Shore programme. We're also going to hear from Professor Tony Roskilly, the lead of the hub, and he's going to talk to you about the hub's plans. But first up, we're going to hear once again from our Chief Scientific Advisor, Sarah Sharples, about the importance of funding early research like this to support what we're trying to achieve. So over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. It's quite funny, being an academic, there are a number of sort of almost red letter days in a year. It might be graduation time where there's a bit of a sense of celebration. You see your students get that sort of excitement from completing their degrees. Or for me, International Women's Day is always a day that feels a little bit like an extra birthday because everyone is celebrating the brilliant women that we have in science and engineering across the UK and internationally. Well, I've discovered that as Chief Scientific Advisor, you get some extra sort of mini birthdays in the year because you get the privilege of being at events like this where we can really celebrate the award of extremely important initiatives like the Clean Maritime Research Hub that we're going to be talking about for the next 30 minutes or so. So why am I so excited about days like today? Well, I have to say, not least, this represents the start of a really important piece of work being led by Professor Tony Roskilly, who you're going to hear from in a minute, but also the conclusion of a tremendous amount of work from pulling together the sort of initial thought. And I was part of the initial conversation with UKEII, where myself and a colleague from UKEII said, oh, it'd be really good if we could put some money together and come up with some hubs. And I'm afraid the two of us then went away and said, right, we've got this great plan. And we came back about 9 months later and some fantastic teams had pulled together the way in which we can work with UKEII both for this hub and another hub that was announced last week, the Net Zero Transport for a Resilient Future Hub. So I'd really like to offer my congratulations to both of the winning hubs. Because what they're doing is they're bringing together fantastic expertise from academia and industry across the breadth of the UK, and they're going to deliver some absolutely outstanding research. So why have we taken this approach? Why is this collaboration between a government department, Department for Transport, and UKEII, the UK Research and Innovation Organisation that funds research at the range of the technology readiness levels, but in particular the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council that is partnering on this initiative and funding the lower technology research readiness level work that really looks at that fundamental research question that can emerge, that discovery and innovation that we've talked about so far. So why have we done this collaboration? Well, in my experience, scientists and engineers can be at their very best when they're excited by solving a real problem. They're working by people in the settings in which those technologies or those inventions or innovations are going to be deployed. One of the things I've discovered since becoming Chief Scientific Advisor is that the worlds of academia, industry and government are really quite different. We've got very complementary cultures, but they are different cultures. We've got complementary challenges, but they are different challenges. And one of the real ambitions of this hub is to make sure we're bringing together the needs of policymakers, the opportunities for deployment and demonstration that can only be done by working in partnership with industry, and the insight, the intellect and the expertise that comes from the academic partners. So I was really delighted to read the details of what's going to come from the Hub, and I'll try my very best not to say things that then steal from what Jane and Tony are about to say in the future as well. So I thought I'd talk about why I'm so excited about this particular partnership. The first is its truly national focus. We've heard already today that maritime needs an international and a national perspective. And all too often we see in science and innovation that we concentrate the expertise on actually quite a small part of the UK. Well, the awardees, and it's 13 universities that are delivering this hub, come from almost all parts of the UK. And I'm really excited to see what that collaboration can deliver. The second is something that was mentioned this morning, the importance of focusing on the sort of well-to-wake approach, taking a whole systems approach to the analysis and the opportunity for intervention and new solutions from a science and engineering point of view. And that comes across really, really strongly from the work that's being proposed by the team. The third thing is the opportunity that we've got to bring theory to practice so much more rapidly than we sometimes see. You'll see on the slide that the Clean Maritime Research Hub is one part of the much larger initiative of UK Shore. And I think the really important thing that we see there is a way of actually having a pathway through from technologies into implementation. I know that many of you here, and we've heard from people today already, who know they've got really good ideas, they know they've got things that they've demonstrated can work. Making sure that UK Shore and other initiatives, such as our partners in Innovate UK, are able to pull through those technologies is so important. I mentioned International Women's Day in my introduction, and one of the things I was so pleased to see, partly because my previous, in part of my previous role, I was leading on equality, diversity and inclusion, both for the University of Nottingham, but also in a role I held for the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council in their strategic advisory group. We know that we're missing out on loads of brilliant people in this community. We have underrepresentation of women, we don't have diverse ethnicities represented, and the socioeconomic balance of people involved in coming up with some of the solutions in the area of the future of maritime decarbonisation is something we all need to work hard to address. I was really pleased to see within the Hub a real focus on development of future careers. We can't do anything to break the bias that was within the system 40 years ago, but we can break the bias now. We can think about new people that we want to bring into transport decarbonisation, and we desperately need the best people to come and help us tackle those really difficult problems. And the Hub has got an approach that considers equality, diversity and inclusion embedded through all of its parts. And I'm sure they're aware that I'll be absolutely holding their feet to the flames in terms of making sure we do what they've claimed to do and more to make sure that we really address some of the inequality we see. So the final thing I'm most excited about is the partnership. It's the partnership between government and the Research Council, the partnership between academia, industry and policymakers. We've heard so much about partnership that I think is really at the heart of UK Shore. You're very much part of that community. Please don't think that the Clean Maritime Hub is about giving money to a load of academics who are going to go away and write papers. Don't get me wrong, papers are a really important part of being in academia. But the thing that really excites us when we work in these sorts of topics is seeing the work that we've done in the lab being taken through and developed in a more applied setting and then delivered to really make a difference to the urgent challenge we know we have to address as we face the targets that we're all looking towards for climate change. So I'm absolutely delighted to hear from Jane and from Tony in more detail about the Hub, and even more so I look forward to the work of the Hub over the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm Jane Sykes. I'm from the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. I'm Head of Energy and Decarbonisation in EPSRC, and I have a specific focus on transport. Sarah has mentioned loads of the things that I would like to reinforce and emphasise in terms of why we are investing in this very, very exciting Clean Maritime Hub. First of all, again, to echo those congratulations to Tony, his team, the consortia that he's already brought together and the consortia that is already growing from point of application to today, actually, in terms of the expansion of leverage and partnerships. So it's really exciting to see that happen. This investment is a key part of EPSRC's investment in engineering net zero. It's part of a broader portfolio of very targeted investments that we have developed in collaboration with partners such as the Department of Transport, but other partners across the community, within industry, within government, within civic society, and so on. And one of the things I'd like to reinforce is we're here today with my colleague Neil, and EPSRC is a talking and conversational organisation. We want to understand the needs of the community, what we should be investing in the future, and where we should make those targeted interventions. If I could just have the next slide, please. So as I've mentioned, these targeted interventions, here it's about boosting technologies, it's about boosting processes, it's unleashing that excellence in UK research in engineering and the physical sciences, and driving forward those next set of technologies and ensuring those bring tangible benefits to the UK and our role in that sort of global decarbonisation agenda. If I could have the next slide, please. So what I wanted just to explain very briefly is this is one particular investment that we have got going forward at the moment, a very exciting portfolio in the decarbonisation space. So just to highlight why we're doing this and the types of investments we're making, the partnership aspect with government is really important. This is a really good example of that, working with the DFT for this maritime hub. But importantly, as part of that, is working on those national agendas, those big, difficult challenges. We've just put out a new investment in our Energy Demand Research Centre that's looking at how we can take 40% out of our energy demand scenarios in the UK here. The importance of meaningful business partnerships. Tony will tell you more about the partnerships we're doing through this particular hub investment, but these hubs are all about that real, meaningful relationship with industry from day one. So obviously leverage is important, and that works both ways, government leveraging business investment, but also how you can help to influence and help government take forward its national priorities. As has been mentioned earlier as well, building on those broader research strengths, that excellence we have in the UK in areas such as AI. EPSRC has recently delivered a call for proposals across AI for net zero, so taking forward that fundamental research that's going to drive change and take advantage of our excellence in that space in the UK. We also need to focus on impacts. We've recently highlighted and invested in three new supergen hubs which are focusing on that renewables aspect in terms of networks, in terms of offshore renewable energies, and in terms of bioenergy. So that supply side issue and actually generating the right sort of energy here within the UK. And importantly, to bring in that community and people aspect. So Sarah mentioned the other exciting transport hub we launched earlier on last week, which was that focus on the resilience we need in our infrastructure, but ensure that our infrastructure is connected and works for communities and people as much as it works for business and driving this net zero transition. So I think I'd just like to finalise by basically say we all know the breadth and depth of the complexity of the challenge ahead of us, but we also are all working against constrained investment scenarios, both in government and in businesses such as yourself. So that's why it's really important that we target the investments we make as EPSRC very carefully to support those excellent people who can put in place those right networks and those strong connections across the whole of the community here to really drive that change. So I'd like to welcome Tony up onto the stage to tell us a little bit more about what the hub's going to take forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. And I'd like to thank Sarah for her vision for the creation and the colleagues at DFT and EPSRC in terms of creating the opportunity to establish the hub. And importantly providing the core funding that has enabled the establishment of the UK National Clean Maritime Research Hub. And I'm absolutely delighted to lead. I'm Professor Tony Roskilly. I'm Professor of Energy Systems at Durham University. I have over 30 years experience in maritime research. I know what you're thinking, it doesn't look that old, but I've been around the maritime sector for a long time. I'm an ex-seagoing marine engineering officer before becoming an academic. So I have a long-term vested interest in the sector. So I'd like to start with, in terms of the vision. So our vision is to go beyond conventional marine engineering and naval architecture to create a pioneering research hub, providing technically, environmentally, socially and economically informed pathways to decarbonize the maritime sector. The hub will harness the breadth and depth of and the diversity of the research across the UK to foster collaboration and a drive forward in terms of innovation and transformation of the sector, and we hope to set a global benchmark of excellence. EPSRC and DFT have provided the core funding of £7.4 million that underpins the hub and its research and dissemination activities. An additional £13.9 million of financial and in-kind funding has been provided by the hub partner organisations and the collaborating universities. Therefore, we have created the opportunity to deliver a £21.3 million internationally leading maritime centre of excellence. And we intend to grow on that first stage position. Another really important feature of the hub is that our academic consortium members are already involved and key individuals in complementary hubs, centres and institutes with over £65 million of investment from UKRI in advancing fuel cell, battery and engine technology, the production and use of biofuels, hydrogen and ammonia, increased electrification, carbon capture, etc. All of the areas that we've heard about throughout the week. These are all directly relevant to the challenges that are faced by the sector to decarbonise as quickly as we possibly can. The hub brings together outstanding and diverse team of researchers from 13 universities with a wealth of experience in fundamental research relevant to the major challenges of the sector. We have 72 project partners with an interest in maritime decarbonisation. That's 39 industries and businesses, 8 civic partners, and 25 international organisations from 13 countries. And this is the position we have now, and we will grow the hub over the coming years. The academic consortium, led by Durham University, includes research excellence from Newcastle, Liverpool, Sheffield, City, Nottingham, Birmingham, Cranfield, Ulster, Aston, St Andrews, Solent and Brighton. So we've brought together researchers that have a great deal of expertise in all of the areas that are directly relevant and where we have to deliver new and innovative in the sector. As you can see from this map, our national partnerships include all regions in the UK and will continue to expand, as I mentioned. Our consortium also provides the maritime community access to a wide range of world-leading research facilities. The research outcomes, as Sarah said, this isn't all about writing papers. Our outcomes are really, really crucial for the hub. And they will provide advances in the scale-up of marine fuels and their safe use. New and efficient low-carbon power and propulsion systems, decarbonising energy systems, ports and infrastructure, reducing energy demand through advanced vessel design and increased efficiency, and advances in marine operations and the exploitation of digitization and green finance. The research that we will conduct will create the opportunity, the impact, so environmental impacts with greenhouse gas emission reductions, improved air quality, and a major benefit in terms of the wider marine ecosystem. Economic benefits to increase investment, job creation, cost reduction opportunities, and improve competitiveness. Social impacts in terms of improved health, community resilience, sustainable livelihoods, and the promotion of EDI and building capacity and skills. Again, something that Sarah mentioned earlier. As part of the hub, 6 subgroups will be responsible for various activities. So the Clean Maritime Network Plus will act as a forum for facilitating knowledge exchange and dissemination, and also capacity building. The Exploration and Responsive Research Council will oversee the delivery of the research program. The Clean Maritime Policy Unit will work closely with policymakers and provide advice and evidence through our policy briefings and papers. The Co-Innovation Impact Group will coordinate the application of the research outcomes that I mentioned to port-centric studies. And the EDI Action Group will ensure that EDI is at the heart of everything that the hub does. We have adopted a system approach and a co-innovation methodology to ensure that our research is not conducted in silos or within different themes, that we want to maximize the impact. So we have chosen 5 port-centric scenarios, and we will conduct a co-innovation cycle with all of the stakeholders involved in these case studies in 3 distinct phases. And we will feed into regional decarbonisation, air quality, innovation and regeneration policies and plans, looking at 2030, 2040 and 2050 timeframes. These case studies will not just focus on the ports, but also on the types of vessels that they serve and the wider infrastructure and the communities in which they are embedded. The outcomes and best practice will be shared with all of UK ports and regions through our Co-Innovation Impact Group, our Clean Maritime Policy Unit, and the Clean Maritime Network Plus. So I would like to just finalize by saying that this has just been a brief overview. My original slide deck was about 50 slides, but I was told to cut it down. So I'd like to say that we're on the start of this journey. There's a lot of activity that's going on behind the scenes to get the hub up and running. In due course, we will be launching our website, offering funding opportunities, workshops, conferences, among many other things. So, to be the first to hear about our plans, we invite you to register to be part of our journey by completing a short online form that can be accessed through the QR code on the screen now. So please register, come and join us, and hopefully we will make a huge difference in decarbonising the maritime sector. So thank you for your time and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Tony. Please do, we heard from Sarah about the importance of collaboration, so please do register as Tony's requested. I'm going to move us swiftly on, just so that we stick to time. It's a brave person that stands between a conference delegation and their lunch. So we're now moving into our final section of this session, excuse me, where we're going to hear more about the R&D projects that are funded by UK Shore. But before we do that, I just very quickly wanted to remind you of what's happening for the rest of today. So following our final two speakers, we're going to move downstairs for lunch. But at the same time, and in the same room as lunch downstairs, I wanted to remind you about our Ask Our Experts session. So positioned around the room are going to be experts from Innovate UK, KTN, the MCA, the National Shipbuilding Office, EPSRC, Department for Business and Trade, MOD, Connected Places Catapult, Global Maritime Forum, and a team of Oxford academics. So lots of people for you to talk to, and I please encourage you to do so over your lunch. The CMDC showcase is also going to begin, and that's going to run from 1 o'clock until 4 towards the end of the day across 3 rooms. So in the Cambridge room on the 5th floor, where you're going to find lunch, but also on the floor below in the Abbey and Rutherford rooms. So please do move around and make sure that you see those as well. And finally, then back to this room, once we finish up here, and after lunch at 2 o'clock, there's an Operation Zero event where we'll be updating on progress of Operation Zero, which is the industry government coalition to deliver zero-emission operation and maintenance vessels in the North Sea area. So please do come along and hear more about how that is progressing. Right. So finally, now back to the current session. In the UK Shore programme, we work very, very closely with Innovate UK, who is our delivery partner for the CMDC and ZEVI. So I'd like to welcome Innovate UK's Executive Director for Net Zero, Mike Biddle, to just say a few words.
Thanks, Eamon. Turns out I'm one of those 2 brave people between you and lunch, so yeah, good luck, everybody. I just want to talk a bit about the work that we do in proud partnership with Department for Transport, and actually it's about a partnership across the UK, across the various institutions that really makes this work. Innovate UK, if you don't know us, we're the UK's innovation agency. Government published its innovation strategy in summer of 21. We published our plan for action in November of 21, and there's a lot of activity here about how do we think about a future economy. So how do we get there? How do we make sure that we then grow those companies in scale in the UK, recognizing it's a global world, and actually then thinking about all the parts of the ecosystem and what government can do to make that work together. So all of that is the way we're working through this period. We've been around since 2007. We are having positive economic impact. So you can see there that we're over 150,000 jobs created on the back of government-funded R&D projects that we've invested in, over £6 being returned to the economy for every £1 that's invested. So we can have positive economic impact, and what we need to do is do that in the areas that matter. One of those areas, probably arguably the most important area, is the transition to net zero. The opportunity here is about how do we prosper from being the country that transitions fastest to net zero. So when we started to look at our work on net zero, we looked at the innovation strategy, we looked at our plan for action, and then we were also thinking about the 6th carbon budget and also the net zero research and innovation framework. And when you do that, you start to recognize actually you need to do things about heat, you need to do things about power, you need to do about the things we make and use, and also the mobility side of things and how everything then fits together from a systems perspective. Again, we've already been having positive impact in this area, and over the 5 years from 2015, nearly 6,000 companies supported, and actually sort of seeing there that R&D in the UK is actually sort of growing on the back of that, with 10 billion there and 67,000 of those jobs that we talked about in the net zero sector. So that's why we work in proud partnership. There's the programs that we do that are our core programs, and there's also the programs that we do in partnership with the various parts of government, and in this case, Department for Transport. So the zero emission vehicles and infrastructure call that we've all heard about, what's important here is the fact that we're moving to the projects coming together and also the number of partners, and most importantly actually about the fact that it's a 3-year demonstration. So it's not just about thinking about these things, it's actually trying these things at scale and actually driving that through to the end of sort of March 28. And seeing there that actually it's about the sort of electric side of things and also the shore power and thinking about some of those alternative fuels that have been discussed today. And that's all the way from sort of small workboats all the way to the large offshore ships. And then that's also across the UK as well. So as an island nation, it's important that we think about how that works and how we benefit all of our parts of the economy. And in fact, everything we do has to happen in a place, and actually the ports and the places that we act are actually very, very good way of actually spreading the economic growth across the UK. And there's also then that fundamentally in here, that technology mixture of, like I say, the battery side, the charging infrastructure, shore power, and also those alternative fuels. So all of these projects are actually starting to make this happen in action. And for those of you in the room that are doing that, thank you, because it's the important thing that needs to happen here. And then, of course, there is the Clean Maritime demonstration competitions that we deliver with Department for Transport. And what's important here as well is that this programme is now building to a crescendo and starting to see how some of those interesting projects that we're about to see downstairs can actually start to look at the scale as well. And you can see here that the funding in total is actually sort of already being leveraged by the industry investment that you in this room are providing. So the £102 million of investment is actually a total of 148 because of what's actually happening. And this has all come about since the start of 2021. It's public and private sector working together in partnership. It's very much vessel and infrastructure technologies, again, fuels in terms of hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol. But most importantly here actually is about the fact that we need to work multi-year. It's having that visibility of where the programme goes and how these things can work together that can actually start to build on our research and innovation base in the UK and capture the value for the UK so that we can prosper from that. So for those of you in this room involved in that, you probably know this better than I do as well, but with CMDC4, the clock is ticking with applications closing on the 27th of September, and it will be interesting to see there how some of those things from the previous competitions, and particularly those sort of CMDC2 projects, can actually sort of move on from there. We're also seeing now that this is having positive impact in terms of the environment as well. So these are self-reported figures, so we need to work through them and actually check. And, you know, I don't know about you, but whenever you might have a bit of optimism bias potentially, but there are fundamental savings there in terms of, you know, kilotons of CO2 and equivalent being saved. And that's the sort of equivalent to removing 280,000 cars from the road. So we need to sharpen our pencils and we need to check that that's right, but those are encouraging signs that we're not just having impact in terms of the research and innovation agenda, we're actually having impact in a positive way on the emissions agenda as well. So with CMDC round 4 open, you've got up to £34 million there, and that's Department for Transport really trying to drive the innovation agenda here. And very much looking at actually some of the things that Sarah's been talking about earlier and Eamon and others, you know, the deploying the real world operational demonstration, you know, really starting to get into the how does this really work. And actually it's when you start to deploy some of these technologies that I think we will really learn about how our world will change and how we can capture the benefit from that. So yes, so if you are doing that, let's say clock is ticking, so closes at 11 o'clock on the 27th of September, so just under 2 weeks. But I think my final message, because I am conscious I am one of the two people between you and lunch, is actually this is about innovation with urgency. We talk about 2030 and we talk about 2050. In many ways, that's going to feel like about 8:30 tonight or 9:10, because we've got to crack on. It's less than 10,000 days. You are the people that will help make that happen, and we will work with you to try and do that, because if public sector can work together with private sector, Innovate UK, working in partnership with Department for Transport, it's up to us to make this better and for us to prosper from actually moving to that cleaner economy. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Okay, all right. We're all really very excited about those projects, and it's been great working with Innovate UK. So thank you for those kind words. Okay, it's been an absolutely fantastic morning, and I see our final speaker to wrap it all up is going to join us in 1 second. But just before we do, if I don't get a chance before lunch, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everybody that has been involved this morning. It's been a whistle-stop tour, but we've had some fantastic speakers and presenters today, and I just wanted to give you all an extra round of applause, because it's very much appreciated. An awful lot of hard work goes into organising these events, and you giving up your time is really much appreciated. So if we can, once again, to everybody this morning, thank you. Okay, I would like to introduce my second Permanent Secretary at the Department of Transport, who is going to wrap us up today. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think I would have preferred to be the first brave person rather than the second brave person, but there we are. I won't take too much of your time. It's fantastic to be here today. I'm Jo Shan-McGillingham, second Permanent Secretary at Department for Transport. I only joined DFT a few months ago, so this is my first experience of London International Shipping Week, which I have to say is a bit of like a whirlwind so far from my point of view. We've gone from everything from discussing the role the maritime sector is playing in the regeneration of Liverpool. Last night I had the pleasure of awarding chartered maritime mariner status to 8 new chartered master mariners, and now here today seeing the fantastic work going on together on R&D. And I just couldn't support more what Mike said at the end there about the urgency of what we need to do, but the opportunity for us to do it all together and enable the UK to prosper. In the department, I have particular responsibility for both our work on maritime and our work on science and technology. Before this job, I was led all our work in government on science and innovation, so it's fantastic to hear how the innovation strategy is coming to life and seeing the work of colleagues at EPSRC and Innovate UK today. Also, anyone of you who knows Sarah Sharples, our CSA, will know that, you know, if you're in government and working with chief scientific advisors, you could always see she was a CSA up to something. So it's a pleasure now to be in the department and up to something with Sarah, not just watching from the sidelines. It's clear, I haven't been able to join all of this morning, but I've just caught the last few speakers, and it's clear there's been a fantastic opportunity already today to see everything going on across the sector and that vital collaboration that Mike spoke about that we need here in the UK and globally, and obviously the announcement last week that we're associating to the Horizon programme is a fantastic step forward in that opportunity for international collaboration for us to rise together to the challenge and opportunities of the net zero transition for the maritime sector. It is absolutely a complex challenge. You don't need me to tell you that. But between the policy and the regulatory framework that will be set out later this year in the refresh of the Clean Maritime Plan, to the investment in R&D for innovative new technologies, and the, its extraordinary increases in public R&D investment over the last Parliament, you can already see the benefits of that in the huge amount of progress that Mike talked about in the last presentation. Hopefully lots of you were able to hear from Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, earlier today, announcing the winners of the Clean Maritime Research Hub and launching the International Green Corridor Fund. This is a significant new investment in the hub that will support the early research required to overcome barriers to decarbonisation, and the Green Corridor Fund will provide crucial early support to deliver on the commitments we made at COP26. These new initiatives, in addition to the announcement of the ZEVI winners earlier in the week and the work already underway throughout the UK Shore programme are helping to accelerate the technologies needed to decarbonise this vital sector. And as you just heard from Mike, the projects funded through UK Shore programme are going to make a real difference in terms of reducing the emissions being produced by our maritime sector. Equally, the partnerships fostered through the UK Shore funding are really helping drive that vital collaboration, and we're already seeing signs the additional benefits of that funding beyond the emissions reductions in the creation of jobs and local growth. And again, as Mike showed us, right the way across the country. The CMDC alone has leveraged £45 million of private investment through the first 3 rounds, with 35% of that government funding going to organisations based in Scotland, Northern Ireland, the North East and the North West, and a really vital contribution to the efforts right across government to make sure R&D funding supports economic growth and levelling up. And there'll be far more benefits that we'll see over the coming years in the subsequent rounds of the CMDC and ZEVI fundings and as those projects complete. So now for the projects themselves, it's my pleasure to formally open the showcase, not just because that means you also get to eat your lunch. Over the last 8 months, 31 projects made up of 121 organisations have been busy completing feasibility studies and trials in a wide range of clean maritime solutions. And today they're here, you're here, to share your learnings and insights. So please do enjoy lunch and take time to see the CMDC projects and learn more about the individual projects and what we're learning between and across them about the future potential for the technologies to develop. Hopefully we'll also see some of you back in this room at 2 for the opening of Operation Zero event, where we'll be updating, as Eamon said, on the progress of that government-industry collaboration launched at COP26 to look at the particular opportunities in the operations and maintenance of vehicles in the North Sea by 2025. More on that later. For now, thank you for joining us so far today. The first ever, I understand, Clean Maritime Day at London International Shipping Week. Thanks to everyone who's brought the showcase together, not least the projects themselves. Please do enjoy lunch. Please do enjoy the showcase. Thank you.